Hey y'all, welcome back. It's Miss B. Let's do some math together. Okay. Today we are going to be finding zeros. Okay. In a previous video, I talked about finding the potential zeros, finding those possibilities. Now we're actually going to find all of the specific zeros. Okay. So if you will remember again from last time, we talked about zeros. These are x-intercepts. So the y value is going to be 0. All right. Oops. Another name for these are roots. Okay. So if someone asks you to find x-intercepts, zeros, roots, it's all the same thing. All right. So we are going to go through 3 examples, going from, mild, medium, spicy, like we usually do. And what we're going to first do is we are going to take a look at this part right here. This is kind of me writing out a step list, all right? We're going to list zeros. That means list those possible zeros like we've done before. We're going to test and find an actual root or zero. I'm going to do that using a calculator. You can also do this by guess and check. Okay. We're going to factor what's left over if it's possible, and then we're going to solve everything. We're going to find all our zeros. Okay. So taking a look at this first example, I have x cubed plus 2x squared minus 5x minus 6. Okay, and we're going to find all the zeros. One little hint I'm going to tell you is this degree of the polynomial, so it's a third degree polynomial, highest exponent, this is the number of zeros I'm going to be looking for. All right. So this is not necessarily individual zeros. They could have a multiplicity, and we can talk about that part later. But this is the number of each zero I'm looking for, all right? So the first thing that we're going to do is, like we said, is we are going to list our zeros. We're going to list our potential zeros. Remember that comes from the P over Q. So when I do that in this case, I'm going to have my P, that's my constant. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, and 6. Those are all the factors of P. And then my Q in this case is an understood 1. That's the number in front of my leading term. And that would be just a 1. So remember from last time, every time you find your P over Q, you're going to put every value of P over every value of Q. So I'm going to have 1 over 1, 2 over 1, 3 over 1, 6 over 1. So all of my possibilities are positive or negative, and they could be 1, 2, 3, 6. And you can go back and watch that video if you want more explanation on how to find those zeros. Okay, so this could be considered my step 1. All right. From there, what we're going to do is we are going to test slash find one of our roots. Okay, I'm going to do this with a combination of calculator and synthetic division. Okay, so I'm going to set up my synthetic division as if I'm just going to plug in a random number, and you could guess 1, see if that works, 2, 3, 6, so on and so forth, and see what you get when you do synthetic division. Remember, when you divide synthetically, if you are finding a root, your answer should end up being 0. Okay, so if I do 1, 2, -5, and -6, those are all my coefficients. So when I'm finding a root, that means that this number right here will end up being a 0. Okay, so if you plug this into your calculator, if you plug it into the y equals function of your graphing calculator, you can go to the table and find these values easily. Okay, so when I went through that process, what I did was I found that -1 is one of my zeros. Okay, that's one of my x-intercepts. So I'm going to use synthetic division to finish this out, pull down my first term, multiply on the outside, add on the inside. So I have 1 times -1 is -1. 2 plus -1 is 1. 1 times -1 is -1. -5 plus -1 is -6. And then -6 times -1 is a positive 6. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0. Okay, so 1 is one of my zeros. This is going to be one of my answers when I list all of them out. Okay, so I found 1. I'm looking for 2 more. Remember, we're looking for 3. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to rewrite my quotient. Remember, this is division. I'm going to rewrite my quotient with the variables again. So I end up with 1x squared plus 1x minus 6. Okay, and I am going to try to factor this. All right, so again, if we're going off of our steps, testing and finding one of the zeros, that is going to be our step 2. So this was like our step 2. So our step 3 is we're going to take what's left over and we are going to factor it if possible. Okay, sometimes it won't be possible, in which case we would go to the quadratic formula, but we're going to see if this is factorable first. So when I take a look at this, I'm going to use the shortcut method because my leading coefficient is a 1. Again, I have videos on factoring if you need help with this too, but I need two numbers that multiply to equal negative 6, but add to equal a positive 1. That's pretty easy. That means we are going to be a positive 3 and a negative 2. 3 plus negative 2 equals positive 1, and a 3 times a negative 2 equals a negative 6. So there's my factor. Okay, so that's step 3. That is factoring. And then the very last step, remember we said, was to solve. So we are now going to take each one of our factors, x plus 3, and set it equal to 0. And we're going to set x minus 2 equal to 0. And we're going to solve those. So for this guy, if I add or subtract 3 on both sides, I'm going to get x equals negative 3. And for this one, if I add 2 to both sides, I'm going to get x equals 2. Okay, so this is one of my zeros, and this is one of my zeros. So you see in all three purple, I've got negative 1, negative 3, and a positive 2. Those are all my roots. And I said I was going to look for 3. I found 3. So I am done. Okay, that's an example of a mild one. You find your zero pretty easily. You can factor everything, works out. All right, so let's talk about one that gets a little bit spicier. All right, so this one, again, we have our degree I'm going to look at right here. Here's my degree. So this means I'm looking for 4 zeros. I have 4 roots that I'm going to look for. Okay, but we're going to follow the exact same steps. The first step that we're going to do is we are going to list our potential zeros. Okay, so just like I did before, I'm going to have my P. Remember, this is my P. This is my Q. I'm going to use 1, 2, 4, and 8. Those are all the factors of 8, which is my P. And my Q is 1, so I just have the 1. Okay. So my potential zeros are going to be plus or minus. They can be positive or negative. 1, 2, 4, and 8. So those are the numbers that I'm going to test. Okay. I'm going to set up my synthetic division. So this is going to be my step 2 where I am finding a zero, a root. So I'm going to set up my synthetic here. So I'm going to use 1, negative 1, 2, negative 4, and negative 8. Okay, remember we want this to be a 0 right here. Again, I'm going to use my calculator, punch it in, and I'm going to have that help me narrow things down rather than just guessing all of these numbers and doing the math. I end up with negative 1 once again. All right, so I'm going to do my synthetic division. Pull down your first term. Remember, multiply on the outside, add on the inside. So negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus a negative 1 is a negative 2. Negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 times a negative 1 is a negative 4. Negative 4 plus a negative 4 is a negative 8. Negative 8 times a negative 1 is a positive 8, and we end up with 0. Okay, so this would be my quotient. All right. What makes this a little bit trickier is we're looking for 4 roots. We can't go straight into our factoring here. Sometimes you might be able to, but you don't have to. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to set up another synthetic division bar right underneath it, right here. And I am going to follow the process all over again of step 2. So I found one, that's negative 1. I'm going to find another one, and then I'll get down to a quadratic that I can use the quadratic formula on. I can use factoring on whatever I need to. Okay, so just because you do the synthetic process once doesn't mean you can't do it again. You could do it as many times as you need to, especially when you're looking for more than 3 zeros. Okay. So I'm going to again go back to my calculator, and I am going to find another one, and I get 2. Okay, follow the process again. So pull down my first one, I have a 1, and 1 times 2 is 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0, and 0 times 2 is 0, and 4 plus 0 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8, and negative 8 plus 8 is 0. Okay, so I found 2 of my zeros. I'm looking for 2 more. Okay, now I'm down to a quadratic, so I am going to set that up as x squared, 1x squared, plus 0x. I'm not going to put the 0x part, plus a 4. Okay, this by itself cannot be factored. Okay, so for step 3, this is not factorable, but I can go straight into step 4 where I'm going to solve it. So I'm going to do x squared plus 4 equals 0. And I am going to subtract 4 from both sides. So I'm going to get x squared equals negative 4. And then I'm going to take the square root of both sides. That's going to give me x is equal to, when you take the square root, remember it's positive or negative, okay? And then I have the square root of 4. I know what that is. That's 2. But then remember, we have the square root of negative 1. The square root of negative 1, usually we're told we can't do that. We can't take the square root of a negative number. Well, we can. It's just imaginary. It's the letter I. Okay, so break that apart. I have the square root of negative 4 is equal to plus or minus 2i. And these are my 2 remaining zeros. Okay, so not all your zeros will be real numbers, and that's okay. All right, you just have to find all of them. So in this problem, I'm going to have, for my zeros, I'm going to have negative 1, 2, a positive 2i, and a negative 2i. So there's all of my zeros. Okay, so even if we end up with imaginary numbers, that's okay. They're still zeros. They're still roots. All right. Last but not least, we're going to do one more, and this one's going to get a little bit spicier, all right? Particularly because we have a leading coefficient other than 1. It doesn't change your process at all, though, okay? So we're going to go through the same 4 steps. Step 1, we're going to list our potential zeros, okay? So this time, when we do this, I have 5. So I'm going to do 1 and 5. Those are the only 2 factors of 5. And then my Q is 2. The only factors of 2 are 1 and 2. Okay? So remember, that means I'm going to put 1 over 1 and 1 over 2. So that means that I'm going to have positive or negative. 1 over 1 is 1. 1 over 2 is 1/2. Okay? Then I'm going to do the same thing with 5. I'm going to do 5 over 1 and 5 over 2. So 5 over 1 is 5 and 5 over 2. Okay? So now I'm going to deal with some fractions. Again, not a big deal. All right? Just a heads up, we're looking for 3 zeros. So we're going to find 3 of them. Okay? And I am going to set up my synthetic division. So I'm going to do 2, -3, -3, and -5. Remember, we want 0 down here. Again, for step 2, I will use my calculator to help expedite my process so I'm not having to guess all of my numbers, all right? And then I'll use synthetic division to finish it out, but the number that I came up with on my calculator is 5/2, okay? Don't be afraid of fractions. I promise it does not make a big issue. It doesn't make things more difficult. If you need to, just use your calculator. So I'm going to pull down the 2. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do 2 times 5/2. That ends up being 5. -3 plus 5 is a positive 2. 2 times 5/2 is 5 again. -3 plus 5 is 2 again. And then I've got 2 times 5/2 is 5. And then -5 plus 5 is 0. So I know I got that right. Okay? So then what I'm going to do is I am going to move on to step 3, if it's possible, and I'm going to do 2x squared plus 2x plus 2. That's what I'm going to factor and solve, if I can. Okay. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take out a common factor of 2. Anytime you can take a common factor out of all of your terms, that's always a good idea. So I'm going to take a 2 out, and when I do, I'm left with x squared plus x plus 1. Okay? I'm going to look and see if I can factor this, all right? That means I need two numbers that multiply to equal 1, but also add to equal 1. There's no such thing, okay? We can't have 1 and a 1. Those are the only two numbers that multiply to equal 1. And the only way to add those would be to get a positive 2 or a negative 2. So we're never going to get 1 here. Okay. So right off the bat, I'm just going to put a big X through this. It's not factorable. So what do you do if you're not factorable? You just move to the opposite of B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A, the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're going to jump to the quadratic formula. Remember that in this case, I'm going to write it right here. A is equal to 1. That's this guy right here. B is equal to 1. That's this guy right here. And C is equal to 1 in this case. And that's this guy right here. All right. A, B, and C are your constant, and then your numbers in front of your variables, your coefficients. All right. I'm going to plug this guy into plug all those numbers into my formula. So I'm going to have the opposite of B. So that's going to be -1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. A times C all over 2 times 1. Right? And I'm going to clean this up. If you plug this into your calculator, I'm warning you right now, it might not always come out to pretty numbers. They're either going to be very, very messy if they're irrational, or your calculator is going to completely error out because it's imaginary. All right, so we're going to take this a little bit at a time. I'm first going to take care of everything underneath this radical. So I end up with the opposite of 1, -1, plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 1 times 1. So 1 squared is 1, minus 4 times 1 times 1 is 4. So 1 minus 4 is -3. All over 2 times 1 is 2. Okay? So I can't do anything more with this really, except I can simplify. We don't like to see that negative under the radical, so we can take it out, much like we did up here, where we did the square root of 4 and then the square root of -1. We're going to do the same thing with this guy. I am going to do the square root of 3 and the square root of -1. The square root of 3 is irrational, so we're going to leave that part alone. But the square root of -1 is I that we just went over, so I'm going to push that in front. So my last two answers are going to be -1 plus or minus I times the square root of 3 over 2. So if you want to separate out your answers, it'd be -1 plus I square root of 3 over 2 and -1 minus I square root of 3 over 2. Okay, so these are my other two answers. Remember, we were looking for 3. So we found 5/2. Write all my answers out here. We found 5/2. And then we found -1 plus I square root of 3 over 2. And we found, I'm going to write it down here, -1 minus I square root of 3 over 2. Okay. That is finding zeros. That gives you a few examples that you can follow. If you have any questions, let me know. Leave a comment, let me know if you want another example of this or of something different. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in class next time. Bye.